Hi. Lately, YouTube has been, well, the algorithm of YouTube, which is practically a god in itself, I think, has been throwing at me videos of assorted metaphysical types. And I'm thinking, is this saying something to me? Probably not, but I'm listening to something from it. So there was Rupert Sheldrake, who years ago posited this theory of morphic resonance, where if one blue tit discovers a new way of getting cream, because we used to have deliveries of glass bottles of milk on our doorsteps with metal lids, and apparently in one part of the country, blue tits realise that if you peck the metal lid off the bottle, you can get the milk out, the cream off the top of the milk. And this habit spread all over the country, and apparently inexplicably. But Rupert Sheldrake's theory was that there's a field which all the blue tits were tapping into, and once one blue tit learned the trick, all the others managed to learn it very easily because they were picking up on the kind of extra physical information in the morphic resonance field. And this had a lot of publicity at the time, and I thought, oh, fascinating, and then forgot about it for about 50 years. And I just was reminded of it by seeing Rupert Sheldrake still talking about these fields and how it's the only theory that explains how our consciousness, how our memory works, for example. You look in someone's brain, you don't find patterns that account for every single memory or thought the person has, and it's hard to formulate a theory as to how they would all be kind of held within the matrix of the cell conglomeration that is your brain. And what he's suggesting we're doing is we're tapping into some kind of external memory and calling these memories up into our consciousness. And then the YouTube algorithm directed me to a channel called News Nation, where a journalist called Ross Coulthart has been exploring the phenomenon of the UAPs, the unidentified anomalous phenomena. I'm glad they've changed the name to phenomena, because previously it was unidentified flying objects. So they were objects out there in the sky and we didn't know what they were. But now they're anomalous phenomena, and that, to my mind, that includes things that go on inside our own heads. So the thing that I was talking about in my last video, the kind of little visions on the edge of sleep, although the last ones I saw were not on the edge of the sleep, they were while I was awake, they could be classed as anomalous phenomena, if indeed they're not just constructs of my mind. But if you take into account this idea of the brain just being a kind of an interpreting thing and that everything comes into it, I don't know. Anyway, so Ross Coulthart was interviewing this guy called Jake Barber. He described going on a mission to transport an object from one location in the desert to another location in the desert. So he's driving his helicopter and he's got a winch thing dangling down, and this object gets put in a cradle and he lifts it and he transports it. I think it was 20 miles or 40 miles, not a huge distance, in the desert, in a location which he describes as being called the Range. And the way this is bigged up by News Nation is a little bit suspicious, because they start the video with the usual clickbait. Oh, we're going to reveal previously unseen footage of this thing being transported. And they call it an egg-shaped object with no visible means of propulsion, although we don't see it propelling itself. It's just lying there in the desert. So it's a bit of an assumption to say that it needed propulsion in the first place. It's not a flying object, it's a stationary object, which we are told was a flying object. So, I don't know, it was just, he has credentials. He had 3 other blokes in the video who had good credentials of their own, who were vouching for his character and his honesty, and that he did work where he said he worked, and what he says is credible. But the interesting thing about what he was saying was there was an emotional aspect to it, because he felt that a being was communicating with him, in fact, giving him its emotions. So he was filled with the emotions of this being, and there was joy, and there was sadness, and there was beauty. This sounds very like the mystical experiences that people have reported throughout history, don't you think? Anyway, he was moved to tears while he was fighting with his own emotions, or the emotions that had been implanted in him, to try and carry out his mission, which was flying a helicopter and transporting this object. And even in recounting it later on to the Ross Coulthart guy in News Nation, you could see him beginning to tear up at the memory of this emotion. Now, this is really interesting to me because it has seemed to me for a long time, people posit, oh, there are probably alien civilizations and one day we'll make contact with them. And I've always thought, how on earth would we make contact with them? Their means of communication, if it's physical like ours, if it's like with a vocabulary that you put together and you make words and you project them in space and the other person hears them and interprets them, how on earth would we do that? Because we'd have no idea how their language functioned, and they would have no idea how our language functioned. On the other hand, if you posit it as being a sort of emotional communication, that the feelings, the sensations are what you're projecting, and the desires and all the things that are behind the language, that makes it seem a lot more plausible that you could communicate with a non-human life form. So why aren't we doing this? The sort of programs that are going on very secretively, apparently, within the USA, which may be different compartments of governments and may also be commercial organisations. They're all vying with each other, keeping information from each other. And the public is not being told for various reasons, which may be sensible, they may be spurious. In the case of commercial organisations, I don't think they have the right to keep information from the public about other life forms being in our space. They might want to have a monopoly on the technology, but it's not theirs by right, is it? There may be reasons for keeping such technology from other nations, I suppose. Remember the nuclear arms race, and the Americans and the Russians and the Chinese were desperate to keep their developments from each other because they wanted to get a military edge. I'm not even convinced that's a genuine reason for keeping things secret, because is it really desirable for one nation to have a technological and military edge over every other nation? That gives them such huge, unbridled power. I kind of feel that everybody should have a level playing field and everybody should be able to learn and develop whatever's being learned and developed. Anyway, if there is important new information being squirreled away by all these organisations, sooner or later I do hope it's going to come out and that we'll find out more, if only because it's really fascinating. And also, don't we have the right to know? Now, I don't think governments and corporations have a monopoly on knowledge. I really don't. I think individuals have the right and the ability to develop and explore their own knowledge base. So you can do it on YouTube. You can listen to what other people have discovered and developed. I think you can also go inside your own consciousness and explore dimensions within there. I don't know if those light forms which I saw, that I described in my previous video, were actually evidence of some other life form kind of lurking within my sphere that I just happened to glimpse on the edge of sleep or in the semi-darkness, and that as soon as they realised I was aware of them, they would disappear. I don't know if that's what was happening or if it was what people call hallucinations. But then, has anybody ever plausibly explained what a hallucination is? I don't know, I haven't explored that. But anyway, so I think I need to explore my inner world, and although the idea of getting in touch with alien life forms is totally scary, and it has a way of kind of grabbing you at bedtime. I don't think that's a reason to try and ignore it and shove it away to the back of your mind and never think about it again. Because there are such possibilities. Imagine what it would be like to be able to go into a meditative state and actually communicate with one or more of these beings that are apparently floating around on the edge of our awareness and kind of cohabiting with us in this world. They're there. Surely we should know about them. Lou Elizondo, whose book I was talking about in my previous video, was talking about a government research program to do with remote viewing, remote sensing, that apparently was carried out quite seriously and may well still be being carried out, although it is said that the program was defunded or closed. But I think these things have a way of being kind of moved sideways into a different and differently funded program so that they're not abandoned. Because if Elizondo's right and this program was actually getting results, which I hadn't heard of before, you know, people going into a trance and being able to remotely view other countries' military installations and be able to give accurate guidance as to where to go to see certain things, that's a very valuable resource. They wouldn't have just shut that off, would they? But see, the very fact that military men can be trained to do this remote viewing thing suggests that probably a lot of other people could train themselves to do it, and blow the military, why shouldn't we be doing it? Could we remotely view the aliens in their spacecraft, for example? They've been spying on us. Could we spy on them? Could we go under the sea or inside the earth where things are supposed to be happening that we don't know about? And could we remotely view them? I don't see why not. It's worth a try, isn't it? So here's a question for you. Has anyone out there ever made a deliberate attempt to contact whatever alien beings are posited as being flying around in our skies, dipping down under our oceans, etc.? Has anyone done this? And if so, how did they do it and what results did they get? Why don't you tell me? Anyway, that's it for now. See you later. Bye.